Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time it is, wherever you happen to be, whoever you happen to be. Welcome once again to this week's edition of Full Fat Spoiler Chat, the weekly show brought to you by us, the folks here at Nerd Caliber, or this week, me, the folk here at Nerd Caliber, looking at a particular piece of entertainment, usually pretty recent, that in this case happens to be Season 5 of the show The Expanse, which just finished yesterday. So if you are not all caught up with The Expanse, right up to the show that aired yesterday, then I suggest that you do not continue to watch unless you don't mind spoilers, in which case, please stay with us. I'm Rodney Brown. I'm the editor-in-chief of Nerd Caliber. I am first-person shooter on Facebook as a cosplay photographer, and I am Burley_adopter on Twitter, tech journalist and other things. And joining me tonight, Striker Player, welcome to the show. Angela Foster, welcome back. How am I? I am doing reasonably well, although you'll find out this is going to be a shorter show than normal, in part because I'm the only one that's going to be speaking. But also I've got a little bit of a sinus thing going on, so, probably not going to be much longer than a half an hour, I would guess. Mr. Krakowian, welcome back to the show. Good to see you guys here. And just do a quick run around the other chat features, and nothing so far, so we'll stick here with YouTube for the time being. So again, Season 5 of The Expanse. If you haven't seen it, I suggest you don't continue watching unless you don't mind spoilers. And I'm already going to have to take a drink. And pardon me. So, what is The Expanse? The Expanse is a streaming series, I guess television series, because it first started on sci-fi. Pardon me. And again, I'm going to put that up there to the sinus thing. So it first started on Sci-Fi. After a few seasons, it was canceled on Sci-Fi, and Amazon picked it up. Yay, Amazon. Where it had a Season 4, and most recently Season 5. Amazon has announced that it will have a Season 6, which will be the final one on Amazon. The series is based on a series of books, also generally called the Expanse series, although none of the books actually has that particular title. Written by James S.A. Corey, which is a pen name for two authors, Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. And it's incredibly well received. It's been nominated for quite a few science fiction awards. The TV series won the best series last year, well, in 2019. Angela, it is a TV or a series, a streaming series that started on Sci-Fi and has gone to Amazon and is now just wrapped up its 5th season. Anyway, so it's based on these books, and the general concept here is it's set at some point in the future. The books even don't have an exact date. The only date that's ever given in the book is apparently the year 2307, which is when a distillery called Ganymede Gin started. Most guesses are it's around 2350. And humanity has expanded out into the solar system, has colonized the moon quite extensively, Mars, and Mars has developed to the point where it's an independent republic. And also then out into the various larger asteroids in the asteroid belt, and even with some research facilities out in the moons of Jupiter and all the way out to the moons of Saturn. There is a great deal of political conflict between Mars, Earth, or the Earth lunar system, and the belt, which is not really an independent political entity. It's mostly controlled by either Earth or Mars, mostly Earth, but there's a very strong rebellious faction, actually a number of rebellious factions in the belt. So the book series is both a sort of future science fiction political series, but it's also very much a mystery series and an adventure series. And the mystery comes when the heiress for one of the richest families on Earth disappears and their last known location is somewhere in the belt. At the same time, a ship that one of the main characters, well, pretty much the main character, James Holden, was serving on out in the belt, answers a distress call and winds up getting destroyed by some mysterious ships that they just can't track. This all leads, to the whole mystery of what happened to Julie Mao, the heiress to this Mao family. What killed this ship, the Canterbury? Are they connected? And ultimately, the connection is that there was the discovery of this thing called Angela subscribed. Thank you very much. There's a discovery of this thing called a protomolecule, which appears to be the very first evidence of alien life or technology. It's really hard to say what it is. In all of the hundreds of years that humans have been out in space, it is a hard science fiction series in that it makes a couple of logical guesses about improvements of things that are currently in existence, but then doesn't make guesses of things that right now we don't think can possibly happen. Like, it's not possible to go faster than the speed of light, and so therefore nobody has left the solar system. They've colonized as much as they can in the solar system, but Angela, can kids watch this? I wouldn't say that children under teen years should watch it. The very first episode has some wonderful depiction of zero-G sex. Not graphic, of course, because it's not that. But there is a fair amount of cursing, and there is quite a bit of pretty graphic violence. It's been described inaccurately in some ways as sort of Game of Thrones in space. If you look at the violence and the political stuff from Game of Thrones, yes. It doesn't have anywhere near the amount of nudity and sex that Game of Thrones does. So, that's that. If that's your concern, that's not that much of an issue. But it is very complex. You can't casually watch almost any episode of this. They don't spoon feed you anything. So it's a challenging show to watch. Not challenging in that it's not engaging. It's one of the most thrilling and engaging shows. But it doesn't, there's no character who stands there and delivers exposition like, oh, and the Illudium Q36 explosive space modulator that we just installed does this. If they reference it, if it's some sort of new technology or something that wasn't there before, they reference it as part of what's going on in the actual storyline at the moment and give you no other explanation about that. To the extent that they actually had to create one episode that isn't in any of the novels, and it's kind of the story of the guy who invented the what's called the Epstein drive, the fusion drive that is so efficient that it allows ships to burn at 1G and flip and decelerate at 1G, going from pretty much wherever they want to go in the solar system to another spot, depending on the size of the ship and how much reaction mass, how much fuel it has. So that allows for them to have the equivalent of gravity within a ship that's being accelerated or decelerated. But it also often portrays ships, because most of the ships aren't under acceleration all the time, with fantastic depictions of zero-G. The wire work for the zero-G is absolutely spot on. And even when they're not in acceleration, and therefore getting sort of the fake effect of gravity from being accelerated in a direction, they have magnetic boots that allow them to walk around on any of all the surfaces are metal, but they also at that point fluids will float in the air and so on, and they do that beautifully as well. Angela, 10th grade, yeah, I mean, unless your parents have some sort of restriction against doing that, I would say there should be no problem whatsoever for a sophomore in high school to watch this show. And again, it's cursing and violence and complexity. It would be the only things that might keep a younger person than you, or I would say realistically anybody 13 and above probably should be okay with this. depending on what their parents say. So that's the history of what this show is generally about. Very quickly within the show, we are introduced to the main characters, and there's an awful lot of side characters, but the main characters are mostly people who had served on this Canterbury and survived because they were off investigating this derelict ship when the Canterbury was exploded. And they very quickly stumble onto a Martian, basically corvette, a gunship, a warship, but a small warship. And they rename it the Rocinante, and that is, the crew of the Rocinante is the core crew of the show. James Holden, who is an Earther, former Earth Navy, sort of the hero, quite reluctant hero at first of the show. The brilliant engineer on the Canterbury, Naomi Takata, who ultimately becomes Holden's love interest. The wonderful character, it's kind of hard to describe Amos Burton. He's the muscle of the show, but to say that he is like, simple muscle is not even close. And their pilot, a former Martian naval pilot, a military pilot, Alex, and Alex was played by Cass Anvar, who we'll get into. That's one of the very few controversies about this show. So, and then there are other characters that come in and out. One of the major political character running through the show is a UN official who starts out as an undersecretary and ultimately becomes Secretary General, Christian Avisharala. Got that one wrong. But also all sorts of people in the politics on Earth, on the belt, not so much on Mars. You very rarely get any in-depth look at the political structure of Mars until actually somewhat in this season. But you also have a wonderful character, a Martian Marine, Bobby Draper, who is, one of the fantastic characters put on television. So at this point, what I usually do is, what I like about, we're talking about season 5, and what I don't like. But because we've never talked about The Expanse, I'm going to talk about what I like about the series in general, what it does well, and then how season 5 either did that well or differed from previous seasons in either doing something well or less well. It does nothing bad. If any of you people in any of the chats have watched our Nerd Week Live news show that's on Tuesdays for any length of time, whenever there's any news about the show The Expanse, I'm an absolute just glutton for this show. I think it's brilliant. I absolutely love it. I think it's one of the best science fiction shows ever put on television. Probably right now, in my estimation, the best. Beating out Battlestar Galactica, which was probably my favorite prior to that. The reboot of Galactica, not the original. The reasons I like the show in general, the writing is super smart. Both from a plotting standpoint, they take things very closely from the political and personal plots of the book. The character writing is generally fantastic. Even characters that aren't going to be around for more than an episode. And there are a lot of characters that don't last an episode. Are given a sense by both the writing and the good actors. They choose excellent actors for these characters. That they are real people. They aren't just somebody there to die. Or somebody there to advance a plot point element. They're real characters. And that's wonderful to see that kind of writing. In a science fiction show, realistically, science fiction shows have a tendency to rely on coolness, gadgetry, plot. Science fiction is a lot about plot. And to the usual short shrift of character. Absolutely not the case in The Expanse. These characters are deep, wonderfully deep characters. Um, the other thing that I like about it is, as a science fiction fan going all the way back, and an absolute lover of actual real science, the hard science in this science fiction is portrayed beautifully. As a general rule, they don't make mistakes. Um, there are a few points where they give in to the conceit that even in space, you've got to, at least to some extent, hear or feel the explosion when something blows up. Um, but if they shift that to an individual point of view of a character, no, it doesn't happen. It's silent. Um, unless they are in contact with something that is vibrating from the explosion, and that's wonderful. Um, the the zero G work, like I said, or microgravity, I guess you have to use the term nowadays because there's no such thing as zero G, um, is fantastic. Um, the in this recent episode, a lot of the activity with Christian, with the UN, at this point she's back to an undersecretary for a while, is set on the moon, in one of the bigger bases on the moon, and there's a couple of points where they are pouring drinks, and whoever did the CG for the liquid flow, probably booze, into the bottle, nailed it. What it would look like, in super low gravity that we have on the moon. 1/6, I believe, or 1/16. Actually 1/16. So it's really, really low compared to the Earth, and fluids would flow differently, and they make a point of showing that a couple of times. They don't go out of their way to zoom in and concentrate on it particularly. It's just a part of a scene where somebody's pouring a glass, but it's there. In the first episode, there is a scene. In the first episode of season 1, there is a scene where many of the main characters and one or two ultimately not going to last long characters are strapped down, but they're in a cell. So they're strapped down onto seats so they can't move because the ship that they're on is about to do some really crazy maneuvers. But they're in a cell, and whatever's firing at that ship is firing railguns. So they are projectiles that are shot through space, and a magnetic induction gun that shoots faster than a missile can go. And it pierces the hull of the ship, and at one point it goes right through the hull, through the cell that these people are in, and one of them hits one of the characters in the head, and his head just disappears. And it's globules of blood floating in zero G. It's horrifying, it's disturbing, it's spot on as far as anybody can tell. That kind of hard science is fantastic. In this season, Naomi, in escaping, she's a prisoner of her former husband, is the leader of this incredibly militant faction of one of the belt groups, the OPA. This faction is called the Free Navy. And she's a prisoner of his. She escapes by jumping just in regular clothes, no spacesuit, from an airlock on their ship to an airlock of a ship that had just untethered, and just barely survives. She's exposed to that space. She breathes out, so her lungs don't boil. It's perfect. They do so many wonderful things like this in the show. And then when they just, when they have, interactions between characters, on Ceres, an asteroid, or on a base, on Eros, on the Earth, it's brilliantly written, brilliantly acted, personal drama. So that's why I like the series as a whole. That's why I consider it one of the best science fiction series put out there. What I like particularly about season 5 is they sort of brought things back into the the sphere of our solar system and the political conflicts that are going on there. Whereas season 4 was spent almost entirely on one of the alien worlds that was discovered when the ring gate opened. And so, what happens at one point in this series is that the proto molecule takes over the entire asteroid and the research station on Eros. And after disappearing into the atmosphere of Venus, where everybody thinks it's probably been destroyed, it comes out, moves past Uranus, and turns itself into this ring with clearly some sort of field effect in the middle of this gigantic ring. And I mean, it takes the entire material of what was a rather large asteroid, Eros, and reshapes it into this technological ring. They find out that when you get into the ring, and how they find that out is just brilliant, that this background that you see around me is what you see. There are 1,300 or 13,000, I think 1,300, other portals, other rings that open up into other star systems. Opening up, 1,300 worlds for humans to explore and get into. It takes place on one of the worlds, season 4 does, and it advances a little bit the political conflicts of how Earth, the Belt, and Mars now are all sort of struggling to see who gets control of what out there, but not a whole lot. And it's mostly about explaining some of the alien technology artifacts and things like that, to get a little bit deeper into the explanation about what the proto-molecule is and who made these gates and so on. Because of that, it took away an awful lot of the fun political intrigue aspect of the show. It had some fantastic personal conflict and interaction. Season 4 had Burn Gorman, Game of Thrones, Pacific Rim, the amazing Burn Gorman, as basically the heavy, the bad guy for the whole season. And he was fantastic, and that was, one of the best things about that season. The fact that Naomi, who's been a belter, who's born and raised on the belt, in essentially either micro or very low gravity systems, had to try to deal with a near Earth gravity planet, and failed ultimately, is wonderful. Again, very hard science fiction. They look at the implications of what they have set up here for the world that they're in and run with it. Going back into season 5, the Rocinante and its crew have left this other world and have come back into the solar system, and it's mostly about the conflict which was brewing in season 4 between Marco Inaros's Free Navy, the Belt radical militant force, and the Earth. And it's some pretty brutal stuff. One of the things that has been explored in an awful lot of science fiction, generally pretty hard science fiction, is the idea of how would somebody in, say, Mars or the Belt, or somebody outside of Earth, if they were engaged in a war with Earth, how would they fight Earth? And big rocks is one of the easiest ways, really. That is a callback to some extent to Heinlein's Starship Troopers, both the movie and his book. But it's also even a callback to Alfred Bester's The Star's My Destination. And in fact, an awful lot of the book and therefore the TV series is kind of influenced by Bester's The Star's My Destination. Same idea of Earth-Mars belt conflict, engaged in an occasionally cold and often hot war. You know, Stars My Destination also happens to be an actual pitch-perfect pastiche of the Count of Monte Cristo. So it's, yeah, the background of The Expanse is very similar, but the storyline is nothing like it. So I like the fact that season 5 has come back into the solar system, so we get more of the political intrigue and up to actual warfare and conflict. I like the fact that it gives us finally a much deeper look into Amos's background. Let's see if I can find this image. There we go. So up on your screen right now, that's Amos with the beard and with a character that was introduced in season 3, Julie Mao's sister, Clarissa. And Amos is originally from Earth. He's from Baltimore. And he was a very troubled child with a very troubled past. And we get to see a little bit about how he became the easily violent person that he can be. When I say Amos is a muscle, he is the muscle. He is as close to a sympathetic, amoral character as you can get. He will do things for the things he believes in and the people he believes in that most people would not actually feel comfortable doing. But his character is written in such a way, and we, particularly now that we found out even more about his background, we understand how he got there, and it's wonderful. So that's a great change in what they've been leading up to for 5 seasons. I mean, it's taken us a while. We got a fair amount about Holden's background in season 2. We got a fair amount about Naomi's background in season 4 with the introduction of Marco and Aros and their son Philip. And now we're getting Amos's. And through all of that, we got a little bit of Alex's background. And he's not a particularly likable character. He basically left his family, his wife and kids, on Mars to go off and be a pilot on this ship, the Canterbury, and now the Rocinante. And they write that wonderfully well as well. He's told in no uncertain terms by all of his family, his ex and now ex and his kids, that he made his choice. So stay out there in space. Don't bother them. Since we're talking about the character Alex and the actor Cass Anvar, let's get into that, because there's some that to get into. It was announced back when they announced that there would be a season 6 and that it would be the last on Amazon, that Cass Anvar would not be coming back. That's Cass Anvar in the lead chair there, playing the character Alex. Pardon me for taking a drink. And it was announced that Cass Anvar would not be returning to the show because of sexual harassment and assault allegations that had been levied against him. And apparently the internal investigation within the production company and within Amazon found out there was at least enough there to warrant his removal from the show. So I applaud Amazon for doing that. I even more applaud the writers. So the show was written mostly and created by Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby, with Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham also listed as regular writers on the show. So they are tweaking their own content as much as needs be, working with Ostby and Fergus. Ostby and Fergus wrote the brilliant Children of Men. If you've not seen that movie, go watch it. It's amazing. And they wrote the first Iron Man. So these guys aren't, schmucks. But what they did in this episode is they wrote a death for the character Alex that, it's hard to give any credit to somebody who has been credibly accused of sexual assault, but to Cass Anvar's credit, he went along with it. You can tell, the way the character goes out. Karoly Ivanovitz, welcome to the show. The way the character goes out, the way the character dies, he obviously had to be acting within that. We see his death on screen. And then they wrote the reaction to his death as the characters would react to Alex's death, even though it's probably a safe bet to say that many of the actors, and particularly the female actors, are pretty happy to have him off the set. They wrote the death of Alex, and they have their moments of great grief that this friend that have been with them since the beginning of the series is now dead. So kudos to the writers, kudos to Anvar, the only kudos you're going to get from me. And aside, back in 2015, I believe it was, or 2016, I interviewed Dominique Tipper, who plays Naomi, and Stephen Strait, who plays Holden. And then, as a separate interview, I interviewed Cass Anvar and Wes Chatham, who play Alex and Amos, for our YouTube channel here for Nerd Caliber. So you can find the Dominique Tipper Stephen Strait one, and the interview with Tipper and Strait was fantastic. In fact, they had to shut us off. We went over our time. We were all having a great time. The interview with Chatham and Anvar went okay, but everybody else is at New York Comic Con. They're all pretty casual. Anvar's in a suit, and long before COVID or anything like that, he's wearing rubber gloves. And he gave me just this kind of creepy vibe. So when I read about the accusations, I kind of went, all right, I don't have perfect radar of any kind, but yeah, I'm not surprised. So anyway, that aside, it's all over. So I will give Anvar at least the credit of being willing to go along with actually acting his own death, knowing that the reason he's doing it is because his problems coming to light. So when we get to this point, actually I'm running on longer than I thought. When we get to this point, we usually start talking about themes, tone. The tone of the show has shifted a little bit from the first few seasons, from kind of fatalistic to something a little bit more hopeful. And part of that is the fact that the character Josephus Miller, the detective who works for a private police agency on Ceres, who is hired to look into the disappearance of Julie Mao, Miller is absolutely a fatalist. And some of the things that are happening to other people, like the destruction of the Canterbury, the capture of the crew that survives by the Martian Navy, almost being killed by whatever these mysterious ships are that were attacking them, and the discovery of that the protomolecule exists, all of this stuff, it has a tendency to shift towards a kind of a fatalistic, lots of people die, lots of people are going to die, and it's almost like there's nothing you can do about it. But they keep trying, and that's sort of the what the Japanese call the nobility of failure. Knowing that the chances of you succeeding are essentially zero, but you try anyway. As the series has progressed, and as particularly once they realized that the protomolecule ultimately part of its mission anyway was to create this ring gate to open up all of these other worlds for in this case, a species that had reached uh, deep colonization of its own solar system, humans. Um, that added a great deal of sort of hope to the feel of the series, even though everybody is still at war or in a cold war, depending on what point in the books or in the series you're at. Within the solar system, there is now more than 1,000 other worlds out there for humanity to sort of expand and grow to. So that tone has changed, and I like that a lot. It's still pretty brutal. I mean, one of the wonderful things about the show is it does not gloss over the fact that life, trying to live in space, even in a very advanced technology, is really tough. And there are compromises you have to make, and people die pretty regularly. So that sort of brutalist aspect of the show is still there, but now there is more hope instead of brutalism and fatalism. Which isn't to say that the first few seasons aren't enjoyable. You just occasionally have to kind of sit there and go, okay, I get it. This guy is fatalistic. Come forth the golden wings of demise, 1300. Okay, not sure what 1300 is referring to, but welcome to the show. In case you don't know, we're spoiling Season 5 and pretty much all previous seasons of The Expanse. This is our show, Full Fat Spoiler Chat. So if you don't want that spoiled, I suggest you go to a different channel. So, at the end of... let's talk about themes. So the theme of the series has almost consistently always been family. Whether it's fighting against your family, as Julie Mao does, whether it's discovering a family that isn't really your family, as the cat or the crew of the Rocinante does, and certainly Amos does. That's a big part of his growth, or even exploring the different aspects of what family means in the Belt, which is much more of a sort of polyamorous lifestyle. Oh, yes. Yeah, like I said earlier, 1300. 1373 Systems in the Ring Network. Thank you. We're going to call you Golden Wings because the whole name is too long. Thank you, Golden Wings. So, thematically, it's about family. Even when they do things like they explore Holden's background, where he is a product of a kind of a scientific commune where he has multiple fathers and mothers, like actual multiple genetic fathers and mothers. So it's kind of weird, but it does a great job of exploring that. Let's see. I think I just saw something pop up in one of the other chats. Oh no, it's a different alert. My bad. But it also, at a bigger level, it explores sort of human morality at every level, from the personal family morality of Alex and what he does, in leaving his family, to the interplanetary warfare morality of, do you drop rocks on civilians? Do you, in response, nuke civilians? It stretches these morality questions from very, very individual, personal, all the way up to vast levels of interplanetary conflict. It does so by making a lot of the morality decisions rest in the hands of people in power, and that's pretty much the case. If you look here in the United States, when President Obama, or then President Obama, was presented with the intel about the fact that they probably, maybe, pretty probably, but still maybe, found Osama bin Laden, does he send a team in to kill him? There's so much. You'd be going into an allied country under stealth. with an unapproved mission, taking military force into the sovereign territory of an ally, taking out civilians around this person. It's on a much smaller scale than what ultimately happens in season 5 in the Expanse, but it's the same idea. One person had to take all the information about that and make that decision. In this case, it's leaders of the UN or Marco Inaros, leader of the Free Navy, but that's not an accurate representation of how decisions are made in places of power. So ultimately, the whole thing is a show in which almost every decision of importance made by any character leads you to some level of a moral question. And again, that's one of the things I really like about the writing of the show, and probably the writing of the books. I haven't read the books. I'm waiting actually until the show is over. So let's get into that before I wrap up here. So when the news came out that Amazon had picked the show up for season 6, but that it would be the last season, the news, and including we used this term when we covered it on our Nerd Week Live, was that the show was canceled. Shortly after that, Abraham and Frank went on a bunch of different interviews and said, canceled isn't the right word. The end of book 6 is, in their mind, a good place to end the TV series part of the life of this adaptation. Strongly implying that they're looking at potentially making a trilogy out of the last 3 books. And book 9 either is just coming out or has just come out. And from what I understand, again, I haven't read the books, from what I understand from people who have, Greg, who's on the show a lot, or on our Nerd Week Live, has read or listened to all of the audiobooks that are out so far, that books 7, 8, and apparently 9 expand the scope quite a bit, to the point where even Amazon budget might not be enough to do justice to an adaptation. So a lot of people are speculating that what Frank and Abraham are implying is that there are going to be 3 full budget movies to round out the final 3 books. And what that means is, at the end of season 5, and here's the huge spoiler, end of the last episode, episode 10, season 5, what Marco ultimately does is he wipes out the Earth Defense Navy fleet that is guarding the Ring Gate with the help of a Martian fleet of ships. So he controls access to the gate, allows the Martian ships to go in, and we find out that they are heading off through a gate called the Laconia Gate. The Martian leader, Admiral, I think he's called, or maybe they call them generals, I can't remember, Salvatore, is leading this, the one who apparently had been selling all this Martian technology to Inaros to allow him to build up this free navy. That he allows him to go through this Laconia Gate and gives it as sole territory of his fleet. That his group of Martians will be the only ones ever allowed into the Laconia Gate. The reason is that apparently, and we find this in a really quick view at the end, that they found, whereas in season 4 they found an awful lot of alien technology, that so these massive installations on a planet's surface built into the surface of the planet. And in fact, actually, you find out that almost the entire planet is a construct. Mariel Swenson, welcome to the show. I'm wrapping up, spoiling season 5 of The Expanse, and I'm just about to get into the biggest spoiler, the very end of the last episode, so I can get into some speculation about season 6. And so if you don't want to hear that stuff, I suggest you find a different show. But if you are okay with that, if you've watched it or you're okay with it being spoiled, stick around. So what they what the this particular group of Martians have found in this Laconia system is a spaceship, a derelict relic of the ancient, and now mostly dead civilization. Apparently, the protomolecule is a still functioning biotechnology of this biotechnology, nanotechnology. Is almost impossible to describe what it is. Of this ancient civilization, and everything else is gone, but it can still do things like build, the ring gates. The Admiral mentions, this is Golden Wings, the Admiral mentions someone named Duarte who was implied to be in charge of the Martian defectors. From what I understand, looking really quickly at a list of characters in the next season, yes. That there's somebody named Duarte who is... since this would be spoilers or something that hasn't happened, I'm not going to spoil it, but yes, a very important character in Laconia, in this new system. But they are planning to use the last sample of the protomolecule, which the OPA, the sort of default political arm of the belt, had in its possession, that Naros stole. He gave it to the Martians, and they're going to use it to activate this ship, or to try to activate this ship, giving them possibly control over a ship that can move at ways no hard science technology that anybody in the solar system has, and with who knows what kind of powers. So that is where this season ends. So season 6 looks like it's going to establish that conflict and continue the conflict between Inaros and the Earth and Mars. Seasons, if there are season 7 or movies 7, 8, and 9, probably will involve interstellar conflict. And that might be why it's time to wrap up the series at the end of 6 and move into much bigger budget movies. And if that's the case, I am pretty happy with the fact that season 6 will be the last season. If going into movies, if that's what happens, gives them the ability to have just insanely larger budgets, to be able to pull off the kind of stuff they need for, massive aliens versus humans, or alien technology versus human technology, interstellar conflict, then yes, I'm there. I'm for it. As much as I will miss seeing it as a regular series. One last aside, I mentioned Laconia, and this was really weird. This is got to be in the books because it comes right from the books. To get off of the Earth, Amos and Clarissa are stuck on Earth when the rocks drop. So to get off of the Earth, Clarissa, who is from one of the richest families in the entire solar system, mentions that there's this place called Winnipesaukee Island, which is an island in Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire, here in the U.S., here in New England, that is basically just an island of insanely rich people, and they're so rich that each house has its own lunar-capable shuttle. And she knows, because the Mouse had a house, or have a house there, she knows the layout of the island and so on. There's no island in Lake Winnipesaukee called Winnipesaukee Island, but there are plenty of islands big enough to have been taken over by a development of insanely rich people who changed the name to Winnipesaukee Island. And I thought that was pretty wild. And then the name of the gate that the Martian defectors go through is Laconia, which is a town on a waterway that connects Winnipesaukee with another smaller lake called Winnisquam in New Hampshire. So Frank and Abraham must have summered in the Winnipesaukee area at some point. Can't think of any other reason why they would specifically use those names. But that's just a nice little bit of trivia for those of us here in New England. So anyway, that's it. The ultimate wrap-up is I can't wait for Season 6 and what might happen after Season 6. If you are any kind of a fan of adult in the sense of intelligent, not like all sex, science fiction, hard science fiction that treats science right, that has fantastic character writing, political intrigue, all of that. I can't recommend starting to watch season 1 of The Expanse and get up through season 5 before season 6 drops, probably sometime next late fall or early winter. Seems to be when they do these. So that's it, folks. Thank you all for the comments in the chat. Thanks for getting some of the detailed stuff for me there, Golden Wings. That was great. I appreciate it. Golden Wings. We also see some of what the things that seem to have killed the protomolecule builders can do when they destroyed the Barkeith. Yes. That destruction of the Barkeith is one of the... So at the very end, the ship that has Salvatore on it goes through the gate and doesn't make it. And it seems a little weird. The way it's presented to me, I wasn't entirely sure that they didn't make it. So I'm glad you pointed that out, that you think that it was destroyed. That's one of the things about this show. Like I said, it's really complex. It takes sometimes multiple viewings to get things clear, or discussing with other people. And that's great. I love that about the show, that it doesn't just spoon feed you stuff. So anyway, thank you again for the chats. Thanks everybody for joining in. Next week, we're doing something different. And I forgot what it is. So I'm going to look it up on the doc right now, real quickly. Oh, next week we're doing Transformers Earthrise. So that is the sort of latest, the adaptation that was that sort of expanded the war for Cybertron. I believe it was on Netflix. That is done in part by the Red versus Blue people. So we'll look at that, how the animation was, how the story was, how faithful it was to canon, how well it expanded canon, and so on. So if you're interested in that and you've seen it and you want to chat, we'll see you next Thursday. Otherwise, ideally, we'll see you Tuesday for Nerd Week Live. We talk about nerd news from this week up to Tuesday. Boy, do we already have a lot of news. So it's probably going to be another big show next week. So thank you again. But as always, stay safe, folks. Wash your hands. Wear your mask. Social distance. Here in Massachusetts and in some other places, the numbers, the rates of infection are going down. And that's a wonderful thing. Without vaccine, right now we're projected to be on average across the United States breaking essentially 0% to have at least one day with no infection by late April, based on the way the trends are going. So we might actually have cons again this summer, but the way to make sure that happens is to continue to be vigilant. Remember, there are new strains out there that are more infectious. So please stay safe, folks. And with that, I'll see you later. Thanks again. Have a good evening.